Hey, welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Raymond Hatfield, and today we have another community spotlight interview with Beginner Photography Podcast community group member Lewis Stevenson, and it is a great one. I'm so excited for this because back in early 2016, maybe even late 2015, when the podcast was started, it was just interviews, and it was we'd put them out on online. We didn't know what we were doing. I had no idea, and I was just hoping that people were actually listening to the podcast. And it didn't start a community for a while, probably 2 or 3 years. But then when it did get started, we started it on Facebook, and then people just started showing up. Right away, people started showing up, and that was really cool because that let me know, hey, people were listening and that they're getting value out of this podcast. And I think back to some of those earliest members of the group, in the community, and one of them was Lewis Stevenson. And it's great because to see the photos that he was posting originally in the group compared to the photos that he's posting now that it's been several years later, the transformation is night and day. And it's not that he was a bad photographer in the beginning. It was none of that. It was just that whenever you look at somebody's body of work over a long period of time, you can start to recognize who it is that they are, how it is that they see, and why they, shoot or capture the things that they do. And that is so cool because, again, to be in it, to see his progression over this amount of time gets me so excited because that's what I want to see out of each and every one of you. Honestly, I mean, everybody who comes into the group, I want to see your photos now. I want to see your photos next month. I want to see your photos next year. I want to see your photos 5 years from now. That's what I want, because to see that progression just gets me so excited because, I've been there. And I know that it's so hard because when you're in it and it's you don't see the progression as much as, others might. And that, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, gets me really, really excited. So to be able to see Lewis's progression and then to be able to talk to him today has just been absolutely fantastic because he went from a place of, coming into the group and asking questions and getting the answers that he was looking for to now being the person who is getting those answers that are being asked by others newer in their photography journey. And that's where the power of the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group and community really, really comes in to play because what good is having a group full of people who are trying to better themselves and learn, and just have that community feeling and have everybody come in and just be so supportive. And I truly do love it. So again, being able to chat with Lewis today has been an absolute blast. And if you are not part of the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group already, I really encourage you to come on in, join, share some photos so that I can see your progression as well over the coming years. So you can find the group by just searching Facebook for Beginner Photography Podcast. You're going to find it, right there in Facebook. Come on in, join, share some photos, ask some questions. Who knows? Maybe Lewis will even answer one of those questions for you. So that is it. Let's go ahead and get on into this Community Spotlight interview with Lewis Stevenson. Why don't you just tell me who you are, what you do, and where you're from, obviously.
Lewis Stevenson. I'm from Washington State at the moment. Originally from Oregon, moved up here about 10 years ago. And my career has taken kind of all vast directions, but my dad got me started in photography when I was probably about 6. He gave me my first point and shoot. And from there, he gave me a SLR film camera when I was about 10, before digital, way before digital. You start to feel old when you look back and like, oh yeah, digital's been around for a long time now. But and then I didn't do a whole lot with cameras through school. I did some teacher's assistants in a photography class. For whatever reason, I never took it. And then after school, my dad actually gave me my first digital camera, and that's I've had one ever since, and I've been using cameras regularly ever since. And it wasn't until the solar eclipse, was that about 4 years ago now, that we went down to Oregon, and I had just my phone. I didn't take a digital, at that point, I didn't have any modern digital cameras of any kind besides my phone. and I shot the photos. I sent you two of them, the frog photo in the pond and the solar eclipse.
Right.
On that, I'm like, I really enjoy this, and I think these turned out pretty well. I want to get a real camera and see how I do. And that's kind of gone from there. So started I immediately, actually, for whatever reason, I immediately thought about getting a business license and all that from the start.
Right
I don't know
away.
why. Yeah, I just jumped right into it. Sometimes I do that sort of thing. That's kind of the way I did the race photography this year. I saw an opportunity and just kind of went straight into it. Didn't give anybody opportunity to say no, just went straight in. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's funny. There's a lot of things. Obviously, we jumped a huge amount there
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
film camera there in the beginning to all the way up to race photography today.
Yeah.
So I know that it doesn't sound like you were taking photography seriously with any sort of intention when it comes to composition or technicals
No.
early on. But was there something about photography that just really kept you interested in it long enough until we got to the solar eclipse?
Well, I've always liked to document things I want to remember later type thing. My dad will take pictures of just everything. I mean,
Yeah.
instead of writing a note down, he takes a photo of it.
I
So
love it.
yeah. So I'm not quite that way, but I will take photos of quite a few things like that where I just need to remember something later on. But um, for personal things, I enjoy saving a moment. So it's the whole like recording your life and moments, that sort of situation. So
Mhm.
that's the way I've always kind of like when I was going to market myself as doing, I originally wanted to go in and do sort of a lifestyle type photography revolving around outdoor activities, and basically go on hikes with people and things like that. The things where people normally just take a point and shoot camera or set up a tripod or something like that and actually get good photos of somebody and make friends at the same time. And that hasn't gone anywhere, but I can see where it could eventually, if you just got to build up your social network for something like that
Right.
to work. So yeah.
So at what point did after the solar eclipse that you decided, you know what, I'm going to take photography seriously. I'm going to shoot more with intention. Why do you think those photos sparked that within you?
Um, hmm. I could see that I don't know, something about the photos made me feel that these were pretty good. And that I knew what was good and what wasn't. I didn't exactly know why. And so I thought, if I can do this without knowing exactly why, then maybe I can do better if I actually go at this with some intent. So
Mm,
I don't know. I had wanted to get a good camera for a long time. Is that the eclipse photo was through my telescope.
yeah.
So I wanted to get a good camera for a long time that I could actually hook up with the T adapter through the eyepiece of the telescope. And that was part of the intention. I still haven't done that.
All
But
these
that
years
was
later.
part of the intention. And I have the adapters and just haven't taken telescope out to do it. So I've just been busy doing other stuff photography wise. So
Mhm. So like why was once you started getting into it, you decided, you know what, I'm really going to pursue this. You got yourself a nice DSLR.
yeah.
What was obviously it's a big difference
Yeah.
than the iPhone that you were shooting with. What was the hardest part for you to like fully understand?
Hmm. It's always, I mean, it is the exposure triangle for everybody. I really think it is. Because you don't realize that you can only push the boundary one way so far before it breaks another thing.
Sure.
Um, and for me, originally, it was definitely ISO because everybody's talking about ISO noise, this and that. And you're like, and at some point along the way, you realize that, you just got to get the photo
Yeah.
and you got to stop putting yourself in this boundary that's preventing you from capturing the moment completely. You got to if you capture the moment even slightly below your normal 100% quality that you want, slightly subpar, it's still better than not getting it at all. So I think that really was the hardest part. And the manual camera thing, actually, when I went into it with, I always, when I had a point shoe, I always kind of went about knowing every part of the point shoot. So I would push, I'd push every little manual lock I could so that I could get the photo to do what I want elsewhere in auto. So when I got the manual camera, I actually started out in manual only and ran manual only for like over a year before I started even experimenting with automatic focus, let alone anything else.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And that it's hard. And what really pushed me to go past that was when I started doing the youth sports and realizing that I got to have autofocus, and I can't concentrate on exposure and all these other things at the same time when what I really need to worry about is shutter speed, because each moment's slightly different, and I'm just going to set the shutter speed where I need it so that always at the minimum that I need it so I can get as much light as possible, but at the same time not worry about the other settings and let them do what they need to do so I again capture the moment. So
right. Was there a single photo that taught you that ISO? Like, it almost doesn't matter as long as you capture that moment, or was this something that you learned through a
it was kind of
or blog?
It was kind of organic. I used to follow Scott Bourne a lot when he was doing podcasts a lot, and he was really big about not worrying about the ISO also, and getting the photo, exposing it correctly in camera so that if you need to adjust it later, you can do that, because otherwise you're introducing noise twice. Because once, because the camera's introducing noise because because you're going to get noise on a dark photo no matter what you do.
Sure.
And even if the ISO is high or ISO is low, may have less noise with the lower ISO. But then when you go into the computer, you have a dark photo, and now you're going to boost that noise that's already there and introduce more. So if you start out with the proper exposure, from what he was saying, and then you have less noise to start. So I started experimenting with that, and it seemed to work to me. So I don't know if everybody's process is the same, but for me, I got a lot more photos to keep. Whereas before I was getting a lot of them, was like, there's nothing here to pull out. So,
right.
Yeah.
Did you feel like a weight was lifted off of you when you decided to pursue that instead?
Yeah. When you're not locking yourself into the boundaries of what you think the camera can do, and let it do what it's going to do. And then you can focus on your composition and everything else so much more. You're not, less worried about the technical details and just getting the photo.
Right. Yeah, less worried about the technical details. Just get the photo.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let me ask you. You said in the beginning you were doing like youth sports and whatnot, and you were using manual focus. Why did you choose manual focus over autofocus?
Because that's what I was used to at that point.
With SLRs, film cameras.
Well, no, when I got my first camera, I got the Sony A6000. And I was shooting with that, and as I said, when I first got it, I just started shooting manual everything, just to force myself to learn it. And I hadn't even experimented with automatic zoom or a focus. Let alone learn to trust it for anything. So when I started doing that, I had to learn to trust it and figure out what focus modes I needed to be in and all that, because I just hadn't played with it all. I kind of did the backwards direction. Everybody starts out with auto. I went full manual and didn't know how to use auto. So
that's funny. I was the exact same way when I was in film school. Yeah. So like cinema cameras have no autofocus at all. They're very manual, old lenses. And somebody's sole job is just to make sure that the image is in focus.
Yeah.
They're the first assistant cameraman. So when I was in film school, I bought a Canon XT, just so that I can keep my skills sharp as far as exposure goes. And I was the same way. I was like full manual, everything. I even joked, I was like, I'm just going to break the LCD on the back of the camera, like just so that I have to trust my eye. So I'm right there with you. And it is challenging. And it's like that day that you decide, okay, maybe I'll try autofocus here. And then you realize later, you're like, wow, like so many more photos were in
Yeah.
focus today than
And
they ever were.
you're worrying less about, that and getting so you can focus more on something else.
Yeah,
So because yeah, like I said with the races now, all I'm worried about most is just shutter speed. And um I do review my photos between races to make sure I'm catching focus. But for the most part, I'm not worrying about that. So
right.
uh,
So I'm excited to get into that because I as
yeah,
well love motorcycles, but I want to stay on youth sports here
yeah.
for just a moment because I'm sure was sports something that you were always into, or was this kind of a foreign world for you to jump into as far as a
No,
photographer?
completely foreign because
Uh-huh.
growing up, I didn't do my sports was motorcycles.
Yeah.
So I didn't do, I did soccer in like elementary school, but nothing after that. And so my daughter wanted to do basketball and then softball. And that's what got me into doing that. And I'm like, well, there's nobody here with a camera. Somebody ought to have a camera documenting some of this. And you can't do it with a phone because it's too far away. You're
Right.
capturing like these specks out there. You're not seeing anything. So that's when I started carrying a camera out there and trying to do that. And um, I think I could do. My biggest problem with that was really marketing, is I am not an extrovert at all. So I mean, there'd be these groups of mothers mostly, with talking amongst themselves or about their kids out in the field. That's terrifying to go talk to them.
Right. Yeah, I get that.
So um, I did get to know a few of them, but it's nothing really came of that. But I think it's kind of where I'm at now, in that if you can get you can- you work um, if you're talking if you work top down instead of bottom up. So like there, I was with the parents directly. My plan last year before COVID hit was to go to the recreation center and go through them so that my name is out there through them. And I think that works. I think it should work a lot better because they trust the recreation center. They don't know you. And
Sure.
especially when, it as a older man shooting youth sports, there is a stigmatism there. I can see it. Parents are like, "Who is this guy? And why is he taking photos of my child?" So there's that too. That makes me it, that didn't mentally. I didn't want to put myself out there because of that also, because it kind of that stigma um, prevents you from. It's hard to overcome.
Right.
So
I get that. I get that. So then let me ask, if your daughter wasn't into youth sports at all and you're still shooting motorcycles, would you want to go back to youth sports or stick with motorcycles where you're at right now?
I think I'll still try to do that at some point. Yeah.
Hmm.
But right now, I can see where I can build a motorcycle thing up even further and maybe do cars and some other club activities. So in the area. So I'm going to push this as far as I can. There's other established photographers I got to work around at the moment, but you build up your reputation and the boundaries fall down. So
Of course.
yeah,
So when it came to youth sports, this is kind of my segue question. When
yeah.
it came to youth sports, um, what was the most difficult part in doing that? Not like, because I would assume having my own daughter who's 5 now, at 4 at the time, playing basketball, it's like you really only got like the one vantage point unless you're running around the entire place. Uh,
Um,
was there anything else that was difficult, or was that is that the main thing right there?
Lighting, is you're
Lighting, yeah.
shooting in a really, and especially basketball, you shoot in a really crummy gym. So
Mm-hmm.
um, in softball, I would say it is definitely your vantage points, because you're trying to stay in a place where you're not going to get hit by a ball
Yeah.
and stay out of the way of the players. So you're not exactly on the field. Whereas with basketball, it depends on the gym, but you can go clear around the court. You could even be underneath the basket if it's far enough back, so you're not, not interfering. But with softball, you're really limited on your location. You need a good lens to get out to the outfield. But I would say that's, but that, again, for softball. For basketball, it's always lighting. Because all their softball games are during the day. So
Yeah. Would you be running up and down the court, or do you pretty much
I
find one spot?
kind of the same way I do the racing, in that I find a place to start with them. And
Mhm.
then once I kind of get bored from that location, I move to a different one. Once I feel I got all the shots I can from that one location, all the players or whatever it is, the riders and on the track, I'll move to another location and then start over again, deciding on the angles I want and who I hit my primary targets first, and then start moving on to the rest of the riders. So
When you say primary targets, you mean specific riders?
yeah, the specific riders that have already paid me for the season.
Oh, I see.
So I feel kind of that I should definitely focus on them first. Make sure I get the shots I want there first.
Sure.
Especially on track, where you don't know if there's an on track event where they may be able to finish the race even. So they could shut the race down early because of an accident, or your subject itself might end up having to have motor go out or something, so that he may not be able to finish the race. So you get them as soon as possible, and then move on to everybody else. So
What are some of the other similarities? You mentioned finding a spot, starting with a spot, and then just moving on when you got bored. Are there any other similarities when it comes to youth sports and motorcycle racing?
it's all action sports.
Uh-huh.
So your shutter speeds are all pretty similar, actually. The freeze a softball, you're above 1200. To freeze a motorcycle, you're at 1200 or higher. But I mean, you're, they're all very similar, especially softball, because you're outside, outdoor lighting again. Depending on where the sun is, that's gonna dictate where you're gonna shoot from first. So with softball, in the evening, you're gonna, again, it's like if the sun's coming down over the back, out the outfield, you've got problems, because
Yeah.
everybody's gonna be in the shade. But with the motorcycles, I can just move to a different side of the track. So and just get them from a different turn. So
What has it been like for you to get out on the track and capture those photos? Like, I guess what I want to know here is, um, when it comes to action sports, one thing that I always struggle with is that, like, obviously baseball, basketball, you can get the emotion, you can get that the excitement or the focus that you can get. When it comes to motorcycle racing, like, what is the shot?
for me, it's one of the shots. It's probably like one of the last shots I got, that I sent you a photo of, with the yellow motorcycle there in the front, and you can see two other motorcycles behind him. It's all in the turn. They're folding and they're just battling right there. The only other place you can show that sort of action solely is a panning shot, but it's not. It's still, if you get a pan with more than one bike in it, that's where it's really going to be at. But
Mm,
it's difficult, because the angles you're getting, typically, if you want to fit more than one bike, you got to get them towards you got to be in front of the bike. So
mhm.
you're not panning at that point. So
Why is that the shot? Like, why that one over any other composition or shot?
um, because I think it shows the action going on, whereas everybody else, single rider photo, um, especially with a high frame rate, high shutter speed, you're just showing a person on a motorcycle. They could be anywhere.
Yeah.
Whereas if you really want to show them on a track, you got to show them mid corner. And if you really want to show that they're racing, not just doing, riding around the track, then you got to get multiple riders in that same frame.
Uh,
And you can be wide angle and kind of show the same thing, but when you're up close, my favorite's when you got riders that have clear visors and you actually
mhm.
connect with their eyes, and you can see the intensity going on there. Whereas the reflective visors are really beautiful. They can make beautiful shots, but it's not the same as when you connect with somebody's eyes. Just like wedding photography or anything else, you got to connect with the person. So
Was it the same with U Sports when it came time to taking that photo? Is the photo, quote unquote, one that has other players in it as well?
Yeah, with softball, and I never could grab one because I just wasn't in the right place, right time. I think the slide, where you get someone sliding into home or in any base, and there's somebody trying to tag it out at the same time. That's
Yeah.
really a great photo. Basketball, I got a couple jump shots with multiple people trying to block. Again, it's showing the actual action of the game. It is. Otherwise, again, it could be just a solo player on it doesn't really show that you're in a game. Otherwise, unless you have the other people involved. So
Sure. So it sounds to me like context here in other players is one of the most important things that you can capture
yeah,
in some sort of action sports photograph.
yeah.
Okay.
So it'd be like getting a wedding photo, but they're not in a wedding dress and they're by themselves.
Oh yeah,
So
right. No, yeah. It doesn't really tell the story of a
if there's
wedding
no
day right
story
there, does
going
it?
on, or even if
Yeah.
they're just in a wedding dress by themselves, what's that? Is it actually at the wedding, or is it just somebody in their dress? So
Fashion.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's funny. That's perfect to think about. Let's talk about gear for a little bit when it comes to motorcycles, because you got to have those long lenses, but specifically I also want to talk about autofocus performance and like what's most important there, because that's a world I know nothing about when it comes to high speed tracking and things like that. So walk me through what's important for you.
Well, the lens is well, I'm shooting crop sensor, APS-C, so I honestly think that's an advantage for action sports. Because
Because you get
my
that extra
lens is,
reach.
yeah, and I'm not packing around a 10-pound lens.
Yeah.
So I'm shooting a 7300, and that's actually a full sensor lens, just because that was the option when I bought that lens, and I wanted the ability to upgrade later on if I do
Mhm.
get a full frame camera. But I'm shooting 7300. That's a 100 450. Whereas, I'm shooting with other people that are also at 7300, but I got 50% more reach,
Yeah,
with same megapixels for the most part. So most of the people aren't. 24 is pretty high for anything, and the
I
photos you're
agree.
delivering, most people don't care if it's 24 or 10. They just like the photo. So
Yeah.
and then the focus, I went from that Sony A6000. My first round this year was with the 6000,
Mhm.
and I was doing a lot of. I've always shot that camera in center focus mode. It's just locked in the center, and I would just manually track the rider, whoever it is, or try to capture them as they're coming into frame. Um, but it doesn't. It's slow. It's an older camera.
Yeah.
After the first round, there was enough income coming at that point. I'm like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and upgrade now. And I looked at getting the A7R4, but I realized that camera came out 2 years ago, and they upgrade every 2 years. And I think if they come out with the A7R5, I'll be able to get the 4 for way cheaper. So, and
Yeah.
I had looked at the 6600 for a while, and I liked the camera. There's a couple features I wish it had that it doesn't have, but it's the same body size as what I was already shooting. I knew that I'd be comfortable with it, so I went ahead and got that. And it has similar focus performance to like the A7R4, and its tracking is just phenomenal. I can, I just when I see a rider come in the frame, I just do a half shutter press and move my camera to where I want it and wait for him to fill the frame where it is, and then click the photo.
Mhm.
Um, and it will, I can, even at a distance, you can lock the frame onto like the front of the bike, and it just follows it all over the place. Wherever the bike goes, the focus follows it.
Oh
Um,
wow.
it's really good. Um, I am having last race, I was having some issues with heat. And I think those, at some point you start wondering, is it my camera or what it is? But then you look back to the photos, and like I sent you, I think that wheelie shot, if you look down at the curbing next to the bike, you can see
Uh-huh.
heat waves right there next to the bike.
Warm
So
day.
the photo was Some of those were soft, and those are the ones I know. If you saw, I posted about that. I ran those through the Topaz AI
Oh yeah,
sharpen,
that's right. Yeah.
and that program's magic. It's just
Yeah.
like just astonishing how good that is. But again, I've delivered a number of photos that were just slightly soft. Nobody really cares. It's the moment that they're grabbing. Um, I see them, but again, most of these people look at them on their phones or a small computer screen. I'm looking at them on the 27-inch screen, so it looks soft to me. So most people aren't going to be doing that. So I think it might pay off to be a little. Sorry, it's my dog.
No worries.
It might pay off to be a little critical, because you're delivering better work, but at the same time, you can't be overly critical of something that no one's going to care about. So
that's another one of those.
it's a balance.
To find balance. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So then what's the process of delivering photos, I guess, for all sorts of action sports? Are you culling through the images and picking out the ones that you like best, or are you showing them all and then letting the writer
I'm culling
choose?
them. This is one of those interesting organic stories where I originally shot a half day of a race. I guess it's been almost 3 years ago now. The guy at the time that was shooting all the club races, excuse me. The guy at the time was shooting all the club races, invited me out, and I shot lunchtime all afternoon. And at that time, what I ended up doing is just dumping them all to Flickr. And I had people thank me, but no, I didn't get anybody purchased anything. And then the youth sports thing came up, and from everybody there's got a numbers, and so I just immediately started tagging everybody with numbers and organizing, and I learned how to do that over the 3 seasons. I did 2 basketball seasons and a softball season, and I learned how to do that, call them and organize them and sort them into their own folders, and then upload them to SmugMug. And in that time, and over those 3 seasons, and got it down fairly quickly. At first, it was taking me like a week, and I got it down to a few days. And then this year, I've been doing the same thing with the races, but now I'm doing a lot more photos. So
Yeah.
In a weekend now, I think I mentioned on there, my delivery, I deliver about 800 to 900 photos a weekend, and
Wow.
I'm shooting I'm shooting about 9,000, 8 to 9,000. And so my initial import, I bring them. It's funny, I've lost a bunch of imports by accident, because originally I was calling them before I clicked import, but the tilde key and the escape key are right next to each other. And tilde is kind of universal. I like save or don't save thing. So I use the X to go, no, I don't want that. But sometimes no, I actually did want that when I go back, hit the tilde. Well, if you get 400 photos in and then suddenly hit the escape key, it tells it, oh, you're done. And you lose all of it. So I did that a few times. I'm like, no, that's not working. So I just start importing all of them and going through them. I literally just, right arrow key X, and just go through all of them until I get to a group burst shot. If the first one's the one I want, then I'll keep that one and X everything else out. But sometimes I'll get into a burst and realize I like that one, keep that one, go back a couple, and then change the tag on it. But you literally just go through all of them, and that's the first step. And that first step's gotten a lot simpler since I'm actually on the same laptop right now. My wife bought me a new MacBook. So because my original plan was to do all this on my iPad at the track, until I realized that the iPad Lightroom, their tagging system still sucks.
Right. Yes.
I really wish they'd fix that. It'd be perfect for that, because you can just sit there, swipe through them and tag, but you can't do that. So now Saturday nights, because I'm usually staying at the track, I just import everything to my computer and start immediately calling everything. I'll be done calling that evening for the first day. And then when I get home on Sunday night, then I just have to work on Sunday. And then From there, after I call, that's when I go through and actually start tagging with riders' names. And well, I just do the race numbers. The first couple races this year were took longer because I didn't have the race numbers. I didn't have keywords set up for everybody yet, but I have keywords for 99% of the riders. Every once in a while, a new one will show up. Somebody will switch numbers, something like that, and I'll have to change numbers in the keywords in the system. But really, it's you see a rider, I hit a couple numbers because everybody's got at the most 3-digit numbers, and
Yeah.
it pulls it up, and you hit enter and just go on to the next one. So the one thing I added about halfway through the season was the loop deck. And the loop deck just revolutionized everything for me because I've had this thing for a couple of years, but hadn't really used it other than just, occasionally because it's fun to spin dials rather than trying to slide things with the mouse. Because I think the mouse is really crude when it comes to using sliders because, you always go too far, too much, and you're trying to do a little detail. And it's great for, if you're doing selective editing, but if you're trying to do a bunch of photos quickly, it's rough. The loop deck, I literally just set it in front of my regular keyboard.
Mhm.
And while I can be typing on the number pad on my regular keyboard for the keywording, and I can be spinning dials on the loop deck simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
And because once you learn where each dial is you normally use, you don't even look in that you're reaching down, grabbing a dial, like I need a little more brightness on this one, or bring the shadows up on this one, and then right arrow to the next photo, and you're done. So, and I'll rate the photo and tag at the same time. And I only rate them because sometimes I'll get multiple photos that look similar over a day. And I'll just go like, well, I got 3 photos the same, but this one actually, I have a higher rating for whatever reason. I don't look at it closely and just dump the other ones. So I'm not
Right.
delivering, 10 photos from the same angle, maybe different corners, but look the same. So.
Yeah, I would imagine that in volume shooting like that, where you get a bunch of photos in a row, that is probably one of the most time consuming parts for you on the
Yeah.
back end, is just figuring out like, okay, well, which shot is actually worth it.
You learn not to get precious with your photos
Mm,
because you think you can save every one of them. It's like, it's not worth saving every one of them. You have
yeah.
4,000 more photos to go through right now. You need to get through this. So that
Oh
one's
my
done.
gosh.
Yeah. You're just sitting there thinking like, yeah, it's good, but it's not great. And you got 2 days of photos. If you don't have one from that, then hopefully you get one next round. Is if you're delivering, if you're saving all of them, then you have too many to deliver. And then also people are going to be seeing subpar work. So you just want to give the best you can every time. Sometimes it doesn't work. So you just,
Mhm.
don't waste too much time trying to save something that's not worth saving. So.
Yeah. So, well, keep talking about that as far as saving something. Like what is your editing process like? Is it pretty extensive edits, or is it just try to be as basic as possible?
No cropping. I started doing some cropping this last time because my process gotten fast enough that I'm still delivering them a day earlier than I used to. But editing every one of them. Whereas before, the first few rounds, all I would do is pretty much auto everything.
Yeah.
Auto white balance, auto settings. And if it was something was horrible, I would adjust it. Other than that, I wouldn't touch it. Now I do auto settings, but I'm leaving white balance alone because I found the auto white balance is just awful. You end up changing it anyways. And most of the time you don't need to tweak it at all because the in-camera white balance is close enough.
Yeah.
And I'm shooting in daylight. So my in-camera white balance, I have it set at 6K and just leave it there. It's usually close enough. But yeah, I'm going, and then usually what I'll do is tweak the first dozen photos and figure out what I'm doing on what tweaks I like the most. So like, if I want some clarity or if I need to bring up shadows, just because of where I was at that point in the day, I'll go through that. And once I figure out those settings, then I'll copy them across or sync them across the group of photos that are similar. Some of the
Mhm.
settings like clarity and some saturation, contrast, those things I'll just do across the entire day. Once I decide I have something I like. So it's pretty basic once I get to, the other ones detail. Okay, so sharpening and denoise. Those are basic settings too that I just do across all of them. Is once you realize where the camera's at, that's where it's at for the whole day.
Right.
And then what I'm really tweaking when I go photo to photo is maybe as a little bit of exposure, and so a little bit of white balance. And that's mostly what I'm doing. Every once in a while, I find a photo that I really like. If I find a photo I just think's 5 stars, then I'll sit there and tweak it. Like I'll just go through it really well, so that when I know somebody's going to want this photo, I just want it to deliver and be right. So if I don't have time, some of the people will pay like PayPal, and then I'll go through before they download them, they tweak all of them. But most of the time nowadays, they're buying them off my sales site, which is through SmugMug. And
Sure.
so I just want them to be right to start with and get them close enough. So like I said, with the photos of the best photos, I tweak those one by one. But there's usually out of, the 800, 900 I deliver, usually about 30 of those I tweak one by one, everything.
Those are the 5-star ones.
Yeah. And then the only thing I started cropping this weekend is the end of race photos where you have somebody either holding up like the number 1 finger or, they're waving or something like that. I'll crop in on them a little bit so you can see their face, their smile or whatever. But that's not very many photos. You're talking maybe cropping a dozen photos. So yeah, you just don't have time to do anything else. So.
Yeah, I would imagine. I couldn't imagine going through and cropping, I'll deliver 800-900 photos, same thing like for a wedding. I can't imagine going through each one of those and doing the exact same thing.
There's no time to crop that many photos.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of hard because it's like we get into photography, I think oftentimes for the artistic side of it, and we like the control that we have over a photo. And then at some point you get to like where you're at now and you realize I actually have to let go of some of this control in order to still be efficient with this. Did you struggle with that at all?
No, I've always had this breaking limit where it's like when enough stuff, it's like like the garage or something, like there's enough clutter, things just have to go and you just start tossing things. So, so I think it's kind of the same way with photography. I realized that it's like, I got a pile here. I just got to do it. And I'm, maybe there's a photo that I just really, really will like. So I'll save that for later. It didn't come out right, but it's so rare anymore that now that I've figured out the angles I like and where I need to stand to get in close enough and all that, it's there just really aren't that many photos I think I need to go back to later. It's just you get it in camera and just move on. So if it's not in camera, it's done. So
I got that. Let's take a step back and kind of look at photography overall here for a moment. When it comes to inspiration, where do you draw inspiration from? Where do you get your ideas from?
Other photographers, mostly. Like when I started this year, if you look at my first couple, especially my first round, you see a lot of them are just very horizontal, not a lot of really up close. I was trying to get more groups of bikes, but I didn't know how to get it and be up close at the same time. So it'd be a lot wider photo with a lot of bikes, but you don't see the individual riders as well when you're wider. You're not seeing what they're doing, their feet, hands on the controls, their feet positioning, their body angles, all that stuff you don't see as well when you're further back. You might see the little bit of the action, but when they're spread out, that's kind of like more of a train than it is like showing 2 bikes next to each other, both at full lean. That's much more intense. And to show that really well, you're going to be up close anyways. So I lost my train of thought. So
I like to ask very open-ended questions that can kind of go anywhere, and especially I think when it comes to inspiration.
Okay, so where my inspiration was, so after the first race, I was putting photos up and I was getting good results, but at the same time, I got a couple comments that made me wonder what I could be doing differently. And one of them mentioned a local photographer that was doing all the track days. The difference between a race and a track day is a race is an organized competition, whereas a track day is just a day you go out on the track and you ride by yourself, basically.
Yeah.
There's other bikes on the track, but you just do your own thing. It's not competition. In fact, if you actually get into competitions, they can take you off the track. So it's just out there to learn, get experience and practice. This local photographer, he's pretty much got all the local track days tied up. And I'm not sure if he's doing cars too, but after they talked about him, I went back and started looking at his photos and seeing what he does. And that's when I realized, you can be turning the camera. There's no point in not turning the camera. And that's when it kind of clicked to me. I'm like, oh yeah, all those photos I used to love as a kid in the magazines. Yeah, those photos aren't square. They all have tilts, and they're at odd angles, the colors are more punchy. There's all kinds of little things that, it's the things that everybody likes in social media photos because they're different. And it's not the photos that you're snapping at the side of the track with your phone, because that's not what they're paying you to do. So
sorry about that. I will I'm not even going to get into it. Literally the last 5 episodes, something has gone wrong with a phone or a sound or something. I feel like it's amateur hour over here. So I apologize. You were saying about edits and the photos that you get and why things are big on social media.
And even if you look at car race photos, you'll see that, especially on the closer photos, you'll rarely have a square photo. When they're on track, they're usually if you're up close and filling a frame with any vehicle, there's no frame of reference for level anyways.
Yeah.
So it's only when you're at a wider angle, when you got trees in the background, stuff like that, where things start to look a little weird, but you can break that far enough. I think it depends on the angle of the track and where you're at. So I posted a couple of them where you're at the top of a hill and the track goes off and down at a long angle, and you can see like 1,000 feet of track, but it's around a turn. And if you turn the camera in such a way, the track will enter at top, one corner of the frame and drop down to the bottom corner of the same frame. And the apex of the turn will be all the way over on the opposite side. And I really like that photo because you can get a bike upright, actually, coming out of frame over here, but at the same time, you're getting bikes at an angle coming down from the top of the frame. And it's at that point, the camera's turned at, it could be at like a 30-degree angle. It's way turned out. If you look at trees in the background, they're all crooked as, it can be. But you're not looking at that. You're looking at the bikes, and the bikes are already leaning. So you might make one rider upright where everybody else is leaning even further. So,
so you just learn to be okay with these things.
Yeah, you just got to be okay with realizing that your subject is what you make it. It's not.
Yeah.
These aren't people standing upright. I think, even if you had I can think about softball now, especially if you're looking at the diamond, the angles on the diamond are, when you're looking from home plate, that you've got angles like that. Now, if you were to square it, now you got your second baseman is going to be an angle, but somebody might be sliding into that. You could angle the second baseman into the person sliding, and you have a completely different image. Whereas, because they're going to be leaning into it already, you can lean them further. Whereas that's what you're doing with a lot of these motorcycle photos. You're actually putting a slight angle on it such a way that the bike actually looks like it's leaning further than it normally is. It doesn't change the gap between the bike and the pavement, but it gives you the initial impression that this, of action, whereas normally it's just like, oh yeah, it's somebody going around a turn, and that's something you see every day. But when you're putting your own sort of impression on it, it's like, yeah, this is what actual reality is now. This is my reality. This bike is, you're showing more action than you would normally. And that's not even the right term for it, because it's, I think the camera is very two-dimensional. So you got this flat image, and then if you keep everything square, you have it's all flat. It's square to the frame. It's flat up and down. It's flat left to right, and there's no depth to it. As soon as you if you can get the bike, like the one of those last photos I showed you, the bikes are coming in at an angle, and you're throwing a little tilt on it. It gives depth to the photo, and it intensifies the action that's already going on. It's not ruining the documentary part of the photo, because you're not changing what's going on, but you're bringing that to life where it's not really there normally in a camera, because the camera just squishes everything. So
Right, of course.
so
Especially with such compression, I'm sure that you have
yeah,
out at 300 millimeters.
yeah, and that actually brings me at something else I thought about when I was first started doing this. Is you're doing documentary photography, but the moment you click the shutter, it's a different moment than the next. So you got the first person bike and frame going out of frame. So the first one that's about to leave the frame, that's your leader, no matter when you take the shutter or click the shutter. So it could be the real leader, or it could be 10th place and he's still got bikes behind him. He's now the leader of your photo. So it's every photo, documentary or not, is still judgment of the photographer to place where you want things placed. So
right, yeah.
So, and that's the same thing with the tilting the camera is the same difference. So yeah, the Dutch tilt thing's funny. And like I said, it's like I talked to somebody mentioned, posted up the other day about a building photo, and it's like either you square the building or you lean it even more,
Yeah,
and you
and
make a completely
exaggerate
different
it.
photo. There's an in-between point though that looks unnatural, where it's just slightly out of angle. And that looks unnatural, but if you if you break the photo, I like to call it breaking the image, because it's like suddenly your brain's not looking at it the same way. Before, you're looking at it like, oh yeah, it's just not a good photo. Now it's like, oh, this has some intent to it. It has to be, or the person's just really bad.
Yeah,
But
fell while they were taking a
yeah, the
photo, and they're
building
like,
fell
oh, that
over.
turned out
Yeah.
pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So
funny.
yeah, I like, that's what I started doing out there on the track. I went from taking a square photo to leaning it, and then really leaning it, seeing if I could, what would look like if I stood the bike up when they're already leaning at a 40-degree angle. If I stand tilt the camera almost 45 degrees, stand the bike up and have the land at the angle, what would happen? And I tried that a few times. It works in certain situations, but most of the time people just go like, that's weird. So, but it just, you have to find the right angle for it on the track, where you don't have a lot of background references for the
Yeah,
level of the land and stuff like that. So
I really hope that people listen to this and think to themselves, I'm gonna tilt the heck out of my camera after this
try it,
episode and just try something new. Yeah,
break the boundaries, because they're not, you put yourself in, again, it's like you put yourself in this box of what is possible, and you don't, until somebody tells you you can do something differently, you don't even ask the question. You don't know that. Again, it
sure.
was we talked about that a little bit earlier, maybe before we start recording, that you don't know what questions to ask until you get in a situation where you need to have an answer, and you don't know what, so you try to think ahead, but you can't think ahead without knowing all the details of what's going to come up. So, and
Yeah,
yeah. So, if you just got to test and test and test and test and break your boundaries over and over and over again until you find out what you like. So, what people
and it just
like.
comes
And
with
so,
experience,
yeah. So, and that's where, this has been a great year for me, because again, I'm shooting, shoot 8,000 photos. There's a lot of time to experiment,
Yeah,
and I can have a bunch of bad photos and still deliver a lot of good ones. So
yeah.
it's, yeah, you can't, I don't think at some point in your life, I don't think in your photography life, I don't think you can shoot too much. You just sit there and pull the trigger and see what happens. Because, I mean, it's not like film, and you're not throwing away, not going to a dark room and going, oh, well, there was a bunch of money thrown away. This is just
Yeah.
digital. I may wear out my shutter, my camera eventually, but it's paying for itself at this point. So I'm not worried about that. So,
Right. That's just part of the gig. But it's funny that you say that, because that's exactly how I feel about weddings. Is it's like, even if you shoot families, you want to shoot families, you want to, photograph kids, you want to do all these things, like that's fine or whatever. but how many chances do you get to shoot uninterrupted for like 8 hours
Yeah.
straight,
Yeah.
and just the amount of
And
practice and experience that you can get out of that, I think is invaluable. So even if, you have no interest in shooting weddings, I trust me, I totally get it. I think that you should
yeah.
at least go to a wedding and just shoot the entire time and just see what that's like, because you're going to come out the other end of it more experienced than you
Yeah.
started
Well,
that
you're
day.
gonna see how the lighting changes over the wedding and all that. Um, and if well, what was I going to say there? That the shooting out of the box, you're talking about being out of the box a little bit, but it's you're not you're not risking anything if you, again, if like with the wedding or the race photography, you get the key photos you need to get up front, then play. You just
Yeah.
just do whatever you need, do whatever comes to mind. At that point it's all your time. So um and for me, again, the racing is, I would almost be out there for free, but I'm not going to tell them that. So
Yeah,
it's so
that's
awesome to
fun.
be out there. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of
no, that
work, but it's fun to be out there and watch the bikes up close in places that nobody else has access to. So
yeah, no, it's fun. I also love seeing your photos in the group, because there's not many of others in the group who are shooting sports, at least at the level that you are, with very
yeah,
fast moving subjects and very fun
yeah.
motorcycles to watch. But that brings me to one of my last questions here, which is, this community spotlight series is about you, and it's about the group. So do you remember how did you find the group in the first place? How did
Oh,
that get started?
it would have been right after that solar eclipse again. I just was doing, I was already listening to a lot of podcasts. I do, like Leo Laporte's podcast, all his stuff.
Mm,
And so I started just doing searches, and that's when I got into, like, Scott Bourne was doing podcasts at that point before he got out of it, and Kelby One and all that stuff. And your name was up there too. So I just, beginner, I'm a beginner. I've tried this out. And um, I, the podcast, I've gotten out of listening to a lot of podcasts. I just hadn't had a whole lot of time, but the group is still fantastic. I really don't think there's a better community on Facebook anywhere. Facebook's full of awful communities, and this is this one breaks the rule by far. I don't know how it exists, honestly, but it's definitely worth it's there. For a while had no reason to be on Facebook, but it was the only reason I was on Facebook. So
oh my gosh. Well, why
yeah.
do you think that is? Why do you think that out of all the groups online, because I'm there with you, and to be honest, I don't have an answer, which is why I'm so curious about
um,
this. Like, why do
I
you think
think
it's so enjoyable?
I think typically, I maybe just the name beginner, you get a lot less people that, I think there's a lot of people out there think they aren't beginners, but really are. And those are the type of people that really have opinions that just aren't worth listening to. But they
Hmm.
like to throw their opinion around a lot. And I think maybe they just don't bother to join because it's a beginner group, but it's really, we got a wide mixture now, and
Yeah.
we got, so I mean, we got, people shooting for money, and we got people that, you got podcast guests that chime in once in a while. And so there's a wealth of knowledge there. If you can't find it there, I mean, there's lots of other places, but it's usually you can find an answer to a question there. So
Hmm. What do you think is most valuable? Is it the ability to ask and get answers to questions, or is it just the community and seeing what
it,
others are doing?
it's a little bit of both. I think for a beginner, it's nice to have a group of people that are at a similar level, um, or to compare to, without without hurting your own ego, or maybe occasionally you pump up your ego or something, but you don't you're not threatened, I should say, by the community, because they're all willing to help you, um, but without hurting your ego. And it's everything about art is ego. And
Yes.
anybody who thinks they're not an artist who shoots photos doesn't realize what photography is, because it's all art. So if you're a photographer, you're an artist. It's just they're this go hand in hand. So
That's another thing that's hard to wrap your head around at the beginning, is that
yeah.
you're if you're creating something, you're creating art. I mean, art is
Yeah.
kind of everything. So yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
That kind of goes to what I was talking about, documentary type style photography, because there's no photo you're going to take that's ever going to show exactly what was going on that day.
Yeah.
What you're showing is what you saw.
Mhm.
And by doing that, you've already you've already changed the whole experience for anybody else looking at that photo. So you've created that, no matter what you think. Even a snapshot is creating something. It may not have as much intent in it, but it's still creating something. So
Yeah.
and
We got deep there for a second. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah, no,
That's
I
like,
like I like the philosophy of of art and photography. So
yeah, yeah. Well, I think I can definitely tell that, with your responses oftentimes in the group. I find that you're one of the most valued members, I think, in the group because of your responses. I always look forward to them. And even if they go against popular opinion, which I think is really cool because oftentimes, you've said something and I've had to sit back and think to myself, like, well, why do I think that? Or,
yeah,
like it's that ability to comment on something and still be challenging, which I find to be incredibly helpful, which is why, again, I love having you in the group. And
thank you.
today, it has, of course, you're welcome. It has been a blast for me to chat with you one-on-one and not just over, online avatars.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that the listeners are thinking the exact same thing as well. So before I let you go, can you let us know, aside from the group, where we can find more of
Uh,
your work online?
well, I'm Stevenson Photo everywhere. Well, spelling it is the challenge. So Stevenson, Stevenson, and then I spell photo the European way, Photo. And I'm that where I primarily on Facebook right now, but I have my website's the same thing. And that's pretty much everything right now. I do have a Twitter account I haven't been paying attention to, and I have uh, just all the social media. I got that when I picked out my name. I just got it everywhere.
Of
Right
course.
now, because of where my customers are, I just pretty much on Facebook only and my website. So
Well, that's perfect. Again, Lewis, I'm going to put links to that, of course, in the show notes.
yeah,
And I know that you're in the group as well. But again, I just got to say thank you so much. And today really was a blast chatting with you finally.
thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.